Hello and welcome back to another episode of Critical Reactions with your host, Bryan. We are going to continue on today, wrapping up with a special selection, which is where one of you tell me exactly what I need to check out. Today's special selection comes at us from Brandon, the second song off their first album, The Galilean Satellites. If possible, I heavily recommend that you overlay it or play it simultaneously with its companion ambient track titled Capella off disc 2, as it gives the song a more spacey, atmospheric, and cinematic experience. This is perhaps my favorite vocal performance from the lead singer, Mike Armin. His screaming on the track is distressed, agonizing, yet passionate, and it truly helps put us in the spaceman's shoes. He excitedly navigates and makes his descent to his long-awaited utopia on Jupiter's moon, Europa. Thank you so much for choosing to listen to more Rosetta, Bryan. I hope you have a good experience with it. So that's what we are going to check out now. Their debut album, I had to look this up a little bit to find out exactly what was going on here with overlaying it with the disc 2 track and stuff like that. So I did do a little bit of research through Wikipedia, and I found out that they originally made a bunch of ambient drone music that they were going to use as interludes between their longer post-rock tracks, and decided that they had so much material they were just going to release it as an entirely separate CD, making this a dual CD album. But each of the ambient sections is the same exact length of the track of the album on disc 1, and if you overlay them, which was apparently their intention, you get some interesting songs. So we are going to listen to track 2, Europa, with the Capella ambient sound overlaid around it. Spotify didn't have any way for me to easily do this, but I did find somebody who mixed them, not just overlaid them, but mixed them nicely as well. I really hope this ends up working out. Let's dive into this and see what Rosetta is bringing to the table today. And right off the bat, we can hear the drums, and I'm assuming all this is just the drone. Now we have the guitars kicking in. So this would sound a lot less full without the ambience around it. So we're in a 7-beat phrase right here. Massive wall of sounds. It's interesting, despite the wall of sound, there's actually a lot of clarity. Not as much as a super clear high fidelity production would be, but more so than I would assume for the wall of sound approach that they're going for here. I like that uplift at the end of the chord progression. It keeps rising too, it's so optimistic. The bass is getting drowned out a little bit, but I could hear it. Okay. I'm waiting for this to build into something. There we go. So we've removed our rising hope for this tension, this stress that's present in the guitars. Less like optimism and more like fear, desire. Less so desire, more of something you can't have, mixed with fear of never having it. So we've shifted to a 4/4, but there's some really interesting rhythmic ideas in here that make it feel like instead of 16 for a whole phrase, it feels like it should be 15 beats. There's that shrill sound again. Yeah, look at the volume over there on the left. Basically solid at max. Okay. They found a way to merge the intensity of the second movement with the hopefulness of the first. And it's such a mixed emotion. I love it. Just a very complex feeling in that third wall of sounds. And so that probably explains why we started in the middle of an idea at the beginning of the track. I wonder if the whole album just flows into one another. Alright, I have some ideas on this. I want to start off with some just general concepts going on here. This song is very much a back and a forth. You can view it if you'd like in an A B A B A B pattern. We have quieter ambient work and then wall of sound, heavy, weighty metal, and then quiet ambient stuff, then heavy, weighty metal. We go back and forth between those. It gives us 6 sections in total. But each of those sections is different, I think. I don't know about our A sections, our quiet ambient ones. I do know that they had different drone going on in those sections. However, I don't know if the instrumentation in those sections were different. And we'll have to talk about that later. It is a criticism I have with this version of this song. However, the heavy metal sections, not to be confused with the genre heavy metal, are all distinct. They all have their own riffs to them, their own drum patterns, their own atmospheres and emotional resonances. And as I mentioned, they sort of move between the first time, which has more of a hopefulness to it, the second time, which is a sort of tension and fear, and the third time, which is an escalation and merging of both of those, coalescing into something that feels like it's going to crush me by proxy of experiencing this person's feelings through audio. It was a wild ending. Now, texturally, all 3 of those heavy sections are very similar. They're all wall of sound, guitars existing on the sides, drums in the middle, heavy, weighty, feeling slower as far as tempo goes, but not reducing any intensity or weight. But like I said, harmonically, compositionally, they are different, even if they are primarily doing similar things in each of those. And that's what makes me feel like you could call this an A-B structure, even though the B sections are distinct compositionally. They are very, very similar sonically, and you could very easily just call them variations on an idea if you would like. So that's pretty much a quick overview of what this track is and what it's doing. I do want to focus a little bit on the ambient noise, though. There are certainly sections that I felt it worked really well in. I don't know if it made the song or improved the song in any way. I've never heard the original, but I do think that they worked really well. In particular, I think that the big wall of sound post-metal sections worked really well with the ambience as it added texture to it all. That is, that I'm going to assume that the wall of sound was crafted primarily from the guitar static and distortion and the crackling that comes from all the overdrive and effects and stuff like that. We've listened to a ton of post-metal that creates wall of sound through that texture, and I think we've even listened to some Rosetta before that does the same thing. So I'm going off of that assumption there. So I think having this extra drone texture added to that greatly emphasizes not just the wall of sound itself, but also gives it new textures, slow, methodical evolution of texture rather than just the consistency of static. It is one of the things that I find easily slips into the background for me when I listen to post-metal and is the least static, the least dynamic element. It is very static. And it's something that tends to distract me and bore me a little bit with the genre. So having this extra sound, texture, timbre, all of this that the drone brings to the wall of sound aspect while also fattening it up and widening it out and just making it even larger of a wall, I think works wonders. And I'd love to see more post-metal bands play around with not just as a secondary experience, but as something baked into the original, a way to add shifting sounds to the wall of sound. However, I don't think that the drone works so well in the A sections, and it's primarily because the drone is still very loud. So in many of the A sections, what I could pick up on was sometimes, not an acoustic guitar, but maybe a clean electric, very quiet though, not the wall of sound stuff, not a lot of distortion and static. Occasionally, I think I heard some bass licks in there and a lot of lighter drum work, very cymbal heavy, closed hi-hat, going for quieter sounds. To me, it feels like they're trying to drop the energy down to a 2 or a 3 on an intensity scale out of 10, and that way we have the very large contrast between the wall of sound 10s and the 2 to 3 ambience. But with the drone there, it sort of drowns out a lot of the instrumental stuff, which is why I'm kind of guessing at what I heard, because it was very difficult to hear any of it, because while the instruments are at about a 2 or 3 intensity, and I'd even say a volume, the drone is still up to like a 7 or 8. It drowns everything out, makes it difficult to hear, and also removes the contrast. What should feel like a really nice ebb and flow between lightness, a reduction of gravity, just floating along, and this emotional impact sort of just feels like a consistent emotional impact. It makes the song feel a bit more uniform than I think the original does, and I view that as a detriment. I would love to hear a version of this that either massively tweaks the ambient track, the drone track in those ambient sections way down in volume, or even removes them entirely in order to create that contrast that Rosetta put into the song originally. And this actually brings up a second question I have for this. And I don't think anyone can answer it except Rosetta, unless maybe they have, done an interview and answered this specific question already. Someone can point me towards that. But what was the process of crafting these sounds? As I mentioned, what I read on Wikipedia was that they had created these shorter drone ideas, or they wanted to create these drone ideas as interludes between tracks, and then ended up creating so much drone material that they just decided to use it as a second album entirely, and then cut. This was a 10-minute song, 10 minute 23 seconds. So they cut 10 minutes and 23 seconds of the drone work and then just put it in here as track number two on disc two and said, hey, maybe you should listen to them together. But it doesn't feel like there's any intentionality to that, which is where I find that they are actually hurting their artwork a little bit by not ensuring that every moment is handcrafted. I think that's the key right there. And how would you go about doing that? Because the thing is, too, it is its own separate track. You are supposed to, at some point, also listen to it in isolation. I'm talking about the drone. It's not necessarily just an overlay, it's supposed to work on its own as well. So if you did bring the volume down in those sections, it wouldn't really be a drone track anymore. It wouldn't work in that capacity. But I do think that the original song, Rosetta, is harmed a bit by not bringing the intensity down in the sections where Rosetta does bring its own intensity down. And it feels like one of those things where a little bit of extra handcrafting, and maybe instead of turning this into a neat little experiment of, hey, also, you might have noticed the other tracks are the same length. Have you tried mixing them yet? And that what comes from that. But instead, just have made Europa with the ambience of Capella mixed into it and had, fine tuned every element of it. What kind of drone do you want in this section? What kind of drone do you want in that section? And I really feel like that would have been the best version of this song. Instead, I'm left to choose. Do I want something that has the original, I'm assuming the original contrast in it, or do I want something that feels a bit more full for the large sections? And I don't feel like either one of those is great. But yeah, that's what I'm talking about when I like how is the process of creating this? Because it feels haphazard. They just happened to cut out 10 minutes of ambient drone and overlaid it on Rosetta and called it a day without making sure it all fits. So that's where I sit with that whole thing. I think it's a really neat idea and it inspires me to do something similar. Who would ever think to make multiple tracks and expect the audience to pick up on some cues such as song lengths and start overlaying them? I think that's a very cool idea, especially if it is handcrafted. And when you do overlay them, you get something that is more than the sum of its parts, which I think is my closing uh, idea for this, is that this isn't greater than the sum of its parts, and in some places it's weaker than the sum of its parts. That the overlaid drone diminishes what Rosetta was accomplishing with Europa. The last thing I think I want to touch on, because normally I'll talk about production too, especially with post rock, but I think it's really difficult to when there's two different productions clashing here, and I don't really know what belongs to what. I've already mentioned about some instruments being drowned out in places when regarding the second layer, so I don't think I'm going to talk about that here, but I do want to bring up my emotional story here. And it's sort of going to be an assumption based on the original Rosetta that I have in my head that I don't know is completely accurate, but is what I'm picturing by removing the drone from this. Which, again, might not be exactly what the original Rosetta sounds like, but it's my interpretation of it having not yet heard it. We start off with ambience, and I believe these ambient portions are passages of time only because of how this song was described to me as a song about somebody who is on a destination to this moon of Jupiter, is that what it was? Named Europa. And so this, I feel like, is three snapshots within that journey. We have a little bit of time pass, and then the hope. My assumption is that the lyrics here are going to be about positivity. When I get to Europa, things are going to be great, something along those lines. Then we have another passage of time, and it's a breakdown. It's the fear that maybe things won't work out. Maybe I won't even make it to Europa. I don't know where this person's coming from, but Jupiter can be far. It can take a lot of time to get there, depending on where you start your journey from. And so it's a little bit of this fear, a little bit of madness. I don't know how large of a ship they might be in, but they might be getting cabin fever. Um, and so it's a little bit of this madness. It's a little bit of tension and anxieties and fears all kind of wrapped up into one. And then we have another passage of time and we get the final snapshot. And I don't know what this is supposed to represent, but to me, I get a little bit of that intensity, that fear, that anxiety mixed with an elation that I initially had mentioned was part of this hopefulness from the first heavy section, but could also just be any sort of elation. It could just be joy of seeing Europa. I'm not sure what all the tension is supposed to represent there, but it's a very complicated emotional set. And to me, it showcases the mental journey of this person over the course of their physical journey and how that can change over time. And that's another reason why I think that those A sections work better without the drone, without the ambience. It is about, for me anyways, a passage of time. And the noise doesn't really suit that as well as the sparser instrumentation that I assume is there on the original version of Europa. I really like this build-up though. The positive, the negative, the mixed. Very simple equation, very simple way of writing, but it's one of those things that's super efficient and very effective if you do it right. And I think they did do it right here. And I had a huge grin on my face by the time we hit that third post-metal section, and it's because everything they had set up was falling into place. And it just comes across so good. And then we have the outro, which I completely forgot about, which is just guitar feedback, fade out stuff. This is another section where I think that the ambient drone sort of subverts and undermines what the original track was doing. But again, it leads into a little bit of that tension, which makes me think that something bad happened at the end of this journey. Maybe they overshot the moon and it's the joy, like, oh geez, we're finally here, I can't wait to get on the moon. And then like you start to pass and you're like, no, 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 no. And it's this panic, it's this anxiety, it's the elation, the fear, all of it coming together, and then the chaos of that, the aftermath, missing it. That isn't necessarily what needs to happen in the lyrics. We could have some sort of other event that would cause all this emotion to be felt as well, but that's sort of what I had in mind while I was listening to it. And then sort of the dwindling hope as, the realization of reality sets in, and you're like, well, I guess I'm in here for another 10 years until I hit something kind of vibe, just kind of accepting fate, which is what I felt the guitar feedback was at the end. Let me hit some lyrics and see what's going on there. Alright, so a lot of these lyrics are hopeful. I'm not too sure where the tension really stems from in a lot of this. The opening stanza says, finally, I'm coming home. The satellites, they guide me around your moon. They take me in, and I'm shouting out. They take me in and onto your shores. They take me there, and I'm crying out to satellites to take me. A lot of repetition and manipulation of words to say the same thing over and over and over with slightly different sentences. It says, crying out to satellites to be saved. There's no way to live my life another way. Europa, lift me up and take me. It's about finding this new life on this moon. For whatever reason, whatever they're running from, it's nothing to go back to. And they're just focusing on what's ahead of them. Now, interestingly, this starts up in a phrase that I'm not quite sure what it is. It says, the day of red light pulls me out, marks my way, marks my own. But what is the day of red light? I'm not quite sure. Jupiter is not a red planet. I just checked in case Europa is not a red moon. I'm kind of curious what that's supposed to indicate. Maybe the sun looks red when you're that far away from it? I don't know. If anyone has any information about that, maybe you're a big space nerd, like I'm a big music nerd, you can let me know what that might mean, the day of red light. But they spend 2 stanzas talking about that, and then once again says all of this takes me out of my thoughts, and I'm home to the sky on my way to Europa, looking down, crying out for a home. Again, all of it is just very positive. The only thing I can think is possibly the day of red light could be an emergency light that is accompanied by probably a klaxon sound. It's that generic emergency danger, something's wrong on the ship kind of stuff going on. But he says the day of red light takes me there onto your shore. So I don't think that's it either. I don't know. Everything about this is hopeful. It's all about the future is going to be better. I can't wait to get there. I'm imagining what it's going to be like. All these thoughts are that I'm on my way to this moon and it's going to be my new home and I'm looking forward to it. So I don't know where a lot of the tension and anxiety comes from in the music, what it's supposed to represent in the narrative. Everything here also seems to be rather linear, so my concept of the ambient passages being time shifting, time passing between the verses doesn't really seem to be supported either. So I like my interpretation of it from a musical perspective. The lyrics don't seem to support it though, and I'm curious if maybe I just have a bad read on it, or if I'm missing something very distinct that would tie everything together. I don't know, those are just my thoughts on Rosetta's Europa though. What are yours? Do you have any answers to my questions regarding the thematic resonance? Maybe you just have things that you heard you want to correct me on. Or maybe just add on to what I said. Maybe you have your own thoughts, opinions, and perspectives about it. Put all that stuff down in the description box. Above that, don't put it in the description box. You don't have access to that. Put it down in the comments. Above the comments in the description box, though, you'll find a link to Linktree, which takes you to this menu here. You can find links to my music, ways to support the channel, a link to the Discord server, and so much more. Above that, if you could, like, subscribe, and ring the bell. I greatly appreciate all 3 of those. That wraps it up for today. I'll be back tomorrow, though, 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 9 p.m. UTC, as usual. We're going to continue on with Tech Death Week and check out another special selection. Until next time, remember to be critical, not cynical, of the music you listen to, and have a fantastic morning, afternoon, or evening, whenever you choose to watch my videos.